Hello? Can you guys hear me? Okay. I think we're ready to start. Okay. Welcome to the Firebase workshop. So my name is Henry. I'm going to my second year of CS at U of T. So first, let me just go through how this workshop is going to look like. So I'm going to send this link into the YouTube chat and also into the Zoom. So can you just navigate to the link I sent in the comment section? So this is the repository where I'm going to be doing all my coding. So here I've put some useful documentation for our workshop today, and also I added some demo code. So to start, let's just take a look at what we're going to be building today. So if we go to messenger.henry2.me, which I will also send in the description. So this is what we're going to be building today. It's basically just a texting application, so I can send messages here, and then if I open up a new tab or new window here, you'll see that it sends over. So this is using Firebase's real-time database to communicate between the two instances. Okay. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to clone this repository here. So just copy the clone link here and then open up your IDE of choice and clone it. Once you have that done, we'll scroll down here and we'll take a look at how the structure of this project is. Okay, so you'll notice a few folders in here. So we have the web demo finished, and then we have the web starter code. So the web demo finished is if you want to refer to how the project is supposed to look like if you're stuck somewhere, but we're mostly going to be coding in the web starter code because that's the starter code. So I've already written the code that's necessary to like run the actual website. I just left out the sections that include Firebase so that we can save time here. So let me just first start with talking about what is Firebase. So Firebase is a platform made by Google that allows you to easily do authentication, do database management, and do hosting. So basically so this is like software as a service. So Google will manage these things for you, and then you don't have to set up your own backend. And this is actually really helpful, especially for events like this where you need to build an app very quickly. So with this, instead of having to open up a server and then worry about scaling and setting up the server and all that kind of stuff, Google handles it for you already. So we'll go to the Firebase console to get started. So I'm going to send another link here. So this link here goes to the Firebase console. So if you go there, you'll see a project page, and then you can add a new project here. And then the first thing you want to do is give it a name. So we'll say it's like workshop. And then you can enable Google Analytics here if you want to do that, but we'll just disable it for simplicity. And we'll create the project. So while this is going, if we go back to the Readme file, I've also linked a guide here. So this is the official Firebase documentation. So if you're ever stuck and you need some more detailed guide, this is where to find it. Okay, cool. We have the project set up. Okay, so now on the console, we have a list of the other Firebase features, the other Firebase services. So for this workshop, we'll be focusing on authentication, hosting, and database. So before we can get started on the project side of things, we need to set it up on the console here. So first, let's head over to authentication. And actually, you know what? Let's set up our local environment first before we do that. So if we scroll down here, I mentioned the Firebase CLI, so I'm assuming that you have that installed already. So let's see. If you open up your IDE and then you go to the directory with the starter code, we can navigate into there. So web starter code. Okay, so so the first thing you want to do when you get the CLI is do Firebase login. But since I've already done that, I'm not going to do that again. So this will link the CLI with your Firebase account. After that, you can go to the directory which your project is in and just type Firebase init. And this will list some services that you can turn on or off. So again, we have we're going to want to turn on Firestore and hosting. And we don't have to turn on authentication here because authentication is not handled by the CLI. Okay, now we can find the project. Okay, so it gives us error because it says that we haven't initialized Firestore yet. So we can go back to the console here and set that up. Okay, so if we go over to database, and so we have Cloud Firestore here, we can create the database. So there's two options here. You can start in production mode or test mode. So basically the difference is that in production mode, the database will be locked down so that no one can read or write, which is useful because you don't really want people to start writing to your database when you're not testing. And then test mode is everything is open so that you can run your tests without having to write a security policy. So that's what we're going to go with for now to save time. And then we can just pick our closest geographical location to reduce latency to the server. Okay. Okay, now so the database is in provision. So we'll go back to our CLI here and we'll init again, same steps. So we'll have Firestore and we'll have hosting. And then we'll find our project, which is this one. So now I'll ask you for which files to store the rules and stuff in. So the default ones are good enough, so that's what we're going to go with. Okay, cool. So once you have that set up, you should be able to see that Firebase has generated some files under your directory here. So I guess the first thing we're going to tackle is hosting. So Firebase handles hosting. So there's a lot of hosting providers like GitHub Pages, but Firebase works pretty well because it has a integrated CDN. So basically, no matter where your users are, they'll be able to connect to a Firebase server that's nearby, and they'll pull a copy of the web page from a server that's geographically close to them, so that they don't have to. So if they're like in Asia, they don't need to connect to a North American server. Okay, so we can start with the hosting. Right, so we did the init. Right, so under the public folder here, we have an HTML files. So by default, Firebase will pre-generate some HTML files if you don't have anything. But for our demonstration here, I already made one here, so it's already here. So anything that you put underneath the public folder here will be accessible, will be hosted by Firebase. So this is where your traditional file structure for web hosting begins. So we can like start a local server so that we can test the hosting locally. So all you need to do is do Firebase serve, and it'll provide you a link here. So in this case, it's port 5000. So here we can see this is the basic site that I built earlier. So this is just literally hosting the HTML file here. Now, what if we want to host it online so that people can see it? Firebase conveniently has a feature for this as well. So we'll go back into our starter code and we can do Firebase deploy. Okay, cool. So now we have these links here. So if we just click on it, different window. Okay, but we click on it here. Firebase has already like given us a subdomain. So if you go to this link here, you'll be able to see the site that we're working on right now. So I'll paste that in the chat as well. Okay. So after that, we'll need to actually start getting ready to actually do the code. So Firebase for frontend is a JavaScript library. So the first thing we'll have to do is import the library. So if you're using Firebase hosting, we can use Firebase integrated CDN to get all the dependencies. So that's what we're going to do here. So in the Readme file here, I've already gotten the imports that we need. So we can just copy these and paste into here. Oh, oops, wrong window. Paste into here. Okay, so now the first thing we need to do is initialize the Firebase object. So we can do that with this line here. Oops. Okay, so typically you would need to pass in your Firebase API key if you were not hosting this on Firebase with Firebase hosting. But because we're using Firebase hosting, it'll automatically inject the API keys for us so that we don't need to worry about it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is Firestore. So Firestore is one of Firebase's real-time database solutions. So Firebase has two versions of this. They have the Firestore and then the real-time database. We're not going to discuss the real-time database because it's an older one, and Firestore is like the newer one. So we're going to deal with that now. Okay, so the structure of the database. So the Firebase Cloud Firestore is a SQL-less. It's a document-based database. So basically what that means is that it's not like SQL where you have tables with rows and stuff. It's more document-based. So it's basically like a giant JSON tree. So this is sort of what it looks like. So like there's collections at the highest level, and then beneath that there are documents. And then within the documents, there are fields. So we can just go into the console and just like create a collection ourselves to take a look. So we can just say like test. Actually, I'll widen this. So we can say test, and then we can just add a document here. Okay, so this is kind of the structure of the database so that we know. Okay, so to get started with that on the web, we'll need to create the Firestore object. So we can just copy this here. Okay, so if we go back to our app here, let's just go to the local one. Okay, so if we go back to our app here, we want it so that when you type in a message here, it gets sent to the database. So currently in the code, in the starter code, I have this function here called submit form. So this is run when you click the enter key or submit. So we want to do something here. So if we look at the documentation here, we can write to the database by either doing this to set the item. So set basically means that if you know the collection and the document ID, you can just like directly write to the database. So if there's already an existing value, it'll overwrite it. Whereas add is for adding into the existing collection. So in this case, we're going to do adding because we want to add to the database because it's like we want to accumulate messages, and also we don't. And on top of that, we don't know the document ID yet because that's not determined. Okay, so we can just paste this into this place here. And now if we go back to here and we refresh, and I take the console over to here. So if I type stuff in here, it should pop up over there. Refresh again. Okay, wait, let me check something. Okay, we can fire up the console and see what's going on. Oh, okay, it looks like it was working. It just didn't update for some reason. Okay, yeah, so now when we type in messages here, we can see that it shows up on this side, but we're not getting any updates ourselves. So we'll need to do a listener in order to get updates from the database. So the advantage of using Firebase as opposed to just a traditional database is that it also provides real-time feedback. So what this means is that if your database updates, it'll automatically push the changes over to all your clients so that you don't have to worry about polling or using WebSockets yourself. So for reading data, like I mentioned, there's two options. So you can just directly read for the collection and the document if you already know their respective IDs. But alternatively, so that's just retrieving the data once. But if you want to listen for changes, you can do that with these listeners here. So you can either listen for a specific document if you already know the ID, but alternatively, you can also listen for an entire collection. So this is what we're going to be using. Okay, so I have a function here called setupDBListener, which will run when we start the page. So we can just paste that into here. Okay, if we go back here and refresh. So we'll see in the console that it printed out some items. And that's because on the first load, it retrieved all the items from the database. And if we send in another message, we'll see that it prints another thing. So each time when you edit the database, it'll send a response, and then here is the updated here's the updated collection with all the documents. So we can see like test. Okay. Oh right, I forgot to change one important thing here. I'm going to change test to new text in order to get the actual items. So if we do that now, yeah, we'll see whatever we sent here. So like, hello. So it shows up here now. So the next thing we want to do is put these on screen here. So I've already written some code to do this earlier. So let's go over here. So it's set list. So let me just go over this quickly. So basically what the set list function does is down here is that it just clears the HTML here to make it blank, and then it just iterates through the list of messages, and it appends a div to the viewport, to the DOM, I mean, and then we use jQuery to switch out the content of it to have the new message. So if we refresh the page now, we'll see that we have all these messages here. So actually, if we just start typing here, it's already looking a lot better. And it didn't take that much time to get set up. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is, hold on. Okay, anyways. So the next thing to note here is security, because it's kind of dangerous when you're able to have users send other people messages, because okay, so one common way for people to like send code over is through JavaScript injection. So basically what this means is that if someone wants to, okay, so in HTML, if you want to run JavaScript, you just have the script tag. So like script, and then you put whatever JavaScript in the middle here, right? So if you're not careful and then you take user's input literally and you write that to the HTML page, your browser may interpret that as, okay, the thing that they sent here, the script tag, is actually HTML, and then it's going to run it. So this is very dangerous because people can just send over stuff and then it'll run in other people's browser. So just to demonstrate, so right now I'm using the .text. Sorry, I'm using .text here to set all these things, which is the safer way because it just sets internally what the text inside the div is. But if we use .html, which is dangerous, then this is what will happen. So right now it looks pretty fine, but then if I send in this, okay, so immediately you see that this prompt comes up, and that's a big red flag because I didn't write this code in my code. Like I just entered it in here and then it ran, which is not a good thing. And this also means that if I open this in like a new window, like if I'm a different user, this will also run, and this is pretty dangerous because you can run a lot more attacks if you get JavaScript running on their machine. And the next thing is also just database security. So at the beginning, I mentioned that we're starting the database here in test mode. So that means that all the rules are open. So if we go open up the rules on the Firebase console, we can see that it says allow read write if this thing. So basically it means that if the time is before this, they'll let full read and write permissions. And this is useful for testing, but when you're doing production work, you don't want everyone to just be able to read and write to your database for a number of reasons. So first of all, your security is compromised because all your data is out there. And then second of all, it can cost you a lot of money actually, because in the higher tier, in the paid Firebase tiers, they charge per read and write. And if you have a lot of people just hitting your database, then you're going to rack up a lot of fines. So if we just go into the Readme file here, I've already written a small example security rule, but we're not going to go into too much depth here because that's kind of outside the scope of this workshop. But I'll explain what it means. So we can just copy that and we can put it into the Firebase rules file here. So when you run Firebase deploy, this will get pushed into the Firebase console. So you can just edit everything in here. Okay. Okay, so basically what this means here is for reading, we'll allow them to read if they have a user ID. Actually, this will make more sense when I do authentication in the next bit. But so basically, this will allow them to read if they're an authenticated user. So that means they have logged in. And then this lets them create a post if they're logged in and if the user that they're claiming to be is who they are. And then we can also restrict their the size of the text that they're sending to like 128 characters, for instance. But we'll get back to the authentication part in a bit. Yeah, so basically the main point there is that just don't trust the user's input as far as the stuff they enter, and definitely don't interpret that as HTML directly. So depending on what library you're using, so if you're using React or Vue, this is already handled for you internally, I'm pretty sure. But if you're using jQuery, you have to be careful about which functions you're using. Okay, so next is Firebase Authentication. So another benefit of Firebase is that it handles basically all the OAuth for you, so you don't have to set up all this logic to handle OAuth. So if we go over to the authentication tab here on the console, we'll see that if you go to sign-in methods, there's a lot of sign-in providers. So for our purposes, we'll use Google because it's already set up there. So all we do is enable it and just pick an email, and then we can save. And now Google will be enabled as a sign-in provider. Now you'll notice that there's a lot of other providers. So the benefit of using Firebase is that if a user signs in to multiple providers, you can link them all to the same Firebase account. So what this means is that as far as your code is concerned, they're the same user. So you only have to deal with one user ID, like one set of names, etc., so that they're all linked together. Okay, you'll also notice here that there's a list of authorized domains. I won't really get too much into specifics of this because we won't be adding any custom domains. But if you choose to use a custom domain with Firebase hosting, you'll need to add the domain here in order for authentication to work. Okay, if we head back to the guide now, we can create a Firebase authentication object. So if we go back to our code here, we want to set up Firebase auth. So over here, we can just create a new auth provider. Okay, so now we want it so that when you click on, okay, actually, let me remove this first. Remove this function. I just had this here so that we can automatically log in where you don't have authentication set up, but since we're setting that up, we have to get rid of that. Okay, so now if we refresh the page, widen the window a bit. Okay, so now there's a button to log in with Google, but right now when you click on it, it does nothing. So we'll want to set this up. So Firebase already has this code here to just trigger a login prompt, and all you have to do is just copy this and paste it into this function here, which I already have mapped to the button. So now if we refresh our page and press login with Google, there's going to be a prompt here. Oops. And it'll ask you to pick a user account. So we can just pick this one. And then it'll sign in. Okay. So now we also need to handle sign out. So there's another button after you log in. It hasn't showed up yet, but we'll get to that in a bit. So you can also copy this. So this code will run it when it's signed out. And also you notice that there are these callback functions in here. So after you sign in or sign out, you can put code in here to just do whatever you want. Now, the next thing we want to do is listen for auth state changes. So whether you just press the login button or the logout button, or if you're resuming from a previous session. So we have a auth handler here that we can use. So let's just print the user object from here and see what happens. So if I refresh the page now, so we'll notice that it has all my information now because I'm already logged in. So as soon as you load the page, this function will trigger. And this function will also trigger when you log in or log out. So whenever the auth state changes, excuse me, this function will trigger. So now we want to pass this on to our function for on login down here, which will basically just change the page from the login page to the actual messaging platform. So we can do on login and then pass in the user object. And now when we refresh the page, so we'll see that we got logged in here. So now our options change. And so now our options change and then we can like sign out. So we can sign in. Then we can sign out. And I don't know why it's not refreshing the page when you sign out. I think we gotta set that up. All right. We gotta do, I believe it's window patient.reload. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, I know why. That's not a good idea. We'll put that in the sign out because this will cause an infinite loop. Okay. Let's try that again. Okay, so if we log in now, this problem will come up. and we can press sign out, and then it'll refresh, and then you're signed out now. Okay, cool. Oh, actually, I know a better solution. We can just call this again. Wait. We can just move this outside. I believe this will work. Okay, never mind. Yeah, just go back to before. Okay. Okay, so now now that we have that set up, the security rules will probably make more sense now. So if we just go back here and we want to print out the user. Okay, so we have the user printed out here. So we can see quite a few pieces of information here. So somewhere in here is my user ID. I don't really remember which field it is, but it's in here. And then along with that is some like access tokens and stuff. But the important part is that we have this singular ID that we can use throughout Firebase. So now we'll go out to our Firebase security rules, and we can try to enforce that and see what happens. Okay, so we can just do Firebase deploy. Okay, so now if we try to send a message, it should still work because we're authenticated. Okay, no, it doesn't work. Okay, here it says insufficient permissions. So we'll have to go and investigate why we're not allowed to write to the database. Oh, okay, I know why. Okay, so let's just go back to the security rules and we'll take a look. Okay, so if we go to rules here, for reading, okay, it says request.auth.uid is not null. And our UID is not null because we're logged in. So it's not that. And also we're trying to create a document. So the next thing is it tries to make sure that so request a resource of data is the actual data that you're trying to set to the database. And it wants to see that the owner attribute is equal to the name of the person that's authenticated. So if we go down to our code right now, this should be the thing that's causing us to not be able to submit. Okay, so here you can see that when we add an item to the database, we set text and timestamp, but we don't set what the user's name is. So we can add the owner attribute here. Oops. Owner should be, I believe it's session storage dot. So so in another function, I already set the current user's name into the session storage so that we can retrieve it easily. So we can just get that by doing session storage dot name. And if we refresh our page now, when we send a message, okay, so now we got our name here, and this is being pulled from the auth data, and we're able to actually push it to the database because it passes security rule. Okay. So the next thing is just the Firebase Admin SDK. So the Admin SDK, basically what it's for is if you want to interface with your Python projects. So this is actually more useful for, it's intended more for admin applications. So if you have your backend server, you can talk to Firebase and manage your users. But we can also use it for just interfacing with our Python products in general. Now, the only caveat is that the way that you authenticate with the admin SDK is with service keys. And these service keys have full access to your Firebase project. So this means that if you publish your key, then people can just like manipulate it, which is not a good thing. So let's take a look at how that looks like. Okay, so if we go back to our dashboard here, we can go to settings and wait, let me just expand this. We go to settings, project settings, and then we can go to servers account. So here we can see the Admin SDK, and it asks you to select a platform. So we're going to go with Python here, and we can just generate a new private key. And then Firebase Workshop, sure. Admin SDK demo, and then we'll name it like secrets. Okay. Another thing I want to mention here is that, so currently it depending on what your IDE is, it might look a little bit different, but currently this file here is red, which means it's not going to be staged for version control, which is a good thing, but we want to prevent this key from ever being accidentally pushed onto version control. So what we can do is use git ignore here, and we can add that file into this list. So basically, whenever you push the git will first go and look at the git ignore file, and then it'll check if the file that we're trying to push is in this list, and if it is, it won't push it. So we'll add secrets.json in here, and if we refresh, oh, so see secret.json. Okay, in a bit, when Git rechecks all the files, it'll refresh, and then it'll realize that this file is in the git ignore folder file, and then it won't push it to version control. Okay, so now if we go over to the Python Admin SDK demo folder, we'll have main.py. So this is just like a really short program I wrote just to interface with the Admin SDK. So let me just go over this quickly. So the first thing that we do here is we get the certificate that we just downloaded, and we type it into the initializer for the app. And just like before in JavaScript, we have to initialize the object for the service that we want to use. So in this case, it's Firestore. So we can just create the Firestore object and just run the code here actually. Put this next to the console. Okay, so that's how our database looks right now. So the first thing that we're going to get is all the items from items. Okay, wait, can we comment this stuff out? Okay, I'll just put input here just to stop it. So when we run this, we'll get a big pile of text. And this is actually the information that we retrieved from the database. So this is the collection that we use for the messaging app here. So this is the same stuff. So you see this message here, and then that message is over here. And we're just pulling that from the database here. So we have the items collection, and then we're just going through all the documents that are inside there. Now, the next thing that we can do is write to the database. So we can use this block of code here. So if I click, let me just try this here so that we can advance. Okay, next one. Okay, so now that this piece of code ran, if we refresh the page here, there should be now a user collection. And we have this exact document that we just wrote here. And the next thing we can do is get a signal document. So if we just modify this here, we can change it to true, update. If we click enter, it'll run the next piece of code. And this is what the database looks like. And finally, we can also just do real-time updates, just like we did in JavaScript. So if we create a collection here called cities, and we create a document called sf, and we add a field. So see here, it says that we received a snapshot. So every time this updates here, whatever code you have in here will run. So if we change this again, see it pushes the update here again. So this is really useful for if you have multiple applications talking to the database, you can write on one device, and then on all the other devices, you can just listen, and then whatever change is made, it'll be pushed out to all the other clients without you having to manually check, pull the database or have a loop to check the database or anything like that. So that's basically the main benefit of using Firestore. Okay, so I kind of glanced over some of the security talk that I was supposed to talk about earlier. Let's see where the note was for that. Okay, right. So I talked about git ignore. I talked about sanitizing input. Okay, so another thing is just going back to security now, another important thing is just to keep your packages up to date. So on GitHub, there's a lot of bots that will be able to tell you if your packages are up to date. So they'll just send you an email to say that you need to update your packages. And the reason why it's important to keep your packages updated is that if you don't, there may be some vulnerabilities in the previous versions that can be exploited, right? So if you have this code running on your server and you don't update it, it's possible for an attacker to just take over your system. And additionally, you should use HTTPS, or if you can, to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks. So basically what this means is that it just prevents people from intercepting your requests and just reading the contents. And this is especially important when you're dealing with authentication, because you're dealing with passwords and emails, and you definitely don't want that stuff to get out. We can just take a look at how to set up a custom domain then, because I went quite fast through this stuff. First, let's do Firebase deploy again. Okay, so if we refresh your page, we'll have to log in with Google, like we did locally. And then if I send a message here, it'll be sent over to this side as well. Okay, so now we have this working web app. It didn't take us that long to set up, because basically all you have to do is put together the code bits that are found on the Firebase documentation, and the rest is just like very basic jQuery, and then you can get an app set up very quickly. Okay, so going back to hosting. Okay, so to set up a custom domain here, you can just press add custom domain, and then you can say like s2, So you put in whatever domain you want there, and then if you haven't used the domain with Google before, it'll probably ask you to verify your identity by sending an email or something. But since I already have that set up, it doesn't. And the last thing to do is just set up your A records. So this is pretty standard stuff. You just put this into your DNS provider, and the DNS, and we'll route all of the data from your domain to Firebase. Yeah, I think that's basically all I'm gonna cover. I went like X2 speed for this. But yeah, the documentation here is a lot more detailed. And if you need more help, just contact me on Slack. And you can also check out here for some quick information. So I think that's it then. Let's see, where is this thing? Okay, have a good time then. Goodbye.